Welcome to Justice and Us, Bridging the Space in Between. This is a talk show supported by AIPJ2 where our partners are guests and will share their work and personal journey in the justice sector. As reflected in the title, our talk show encourages all guests to discuss justice as they experience it, the good, the bad, and the in-between. In each episode, you will also see some of our colleagues from AIPJ2 who will take turns as hosts. So I hope you enjoy our episodes.
Ms. Marcos, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our first episode of Justice and Us.
Thank you, Adley. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And it's no accident that you're the first guest on our program because you and I have had many conversations like this over the years. And it was really an inspiration for me to try and share this with other people.
Actually, I think we had to start from our meeting for the first time, Pak. At the time, in 2013, we started to work together. But actually, I am now no longer the director of Rumah Kitab. I have retired now. Technically, now I'm freelance as a consultant. But my experience working with Rumah Kitab in collaboration with you with ITJ is quite important for me as a foundation to be as a professional, let's say, GATSI specialist. I got experience from our work with you. So now enjoying the time for myself, doing some activities and also doing research and of course, back to basic, writing so many things. My last article, I think, is already, printed here with Tim Lindsay about gender and radicalism in the education, in particular with the kindergartens. So another thing is quite active in blog, social media, and traveling a little bit. Enjoying the time as a grandma. I have 5 grandchildren and almost 6 actually. So happy nanny, happy grandma.
And Liz, you and I have talked about your university time and the way that your ideas, your background in Islam sort of in a way converged with the growing feminism movement and how you were involved in both sort of streams of ideas, I suppose. Can you talk a little bit about how that sort of influenced your work?
For Indonesia, actually, gender and development is nothing new. Since the beginning, when I was an activist, we already started to think about the gender. So in Indonesia, at least gender and development started when President Abdurrahman Wahid released what we call the policy about gender mainstreaming. And at the same time, also Indonesia has tools of analysis, gender analysis pathway, for example, and gender budgeting. So this all very, touch with my experience since I was in university. My background university is from EIN, the State Institute of Islamic Studies. But before I finished the study, I actually active in movement at the time during the Orde Baru era and also as a researcher at the same time. So for example, I did research about the poverty in the slum area in Bandung. Then after that, I was thinking about research is important, but the more important is, I think, to work, how to solve the problem. So that is why I involved with the feminist group in Indonesia, in Jakarta, namely Kalyana Mitra.
Nani, please go.
Hi, Nani, how are you? Hi, nice meeting you.
Hi, Nani, good to see you. Thank you for coming. Nani Somanani has been a partner of AIPJ in a way before AIPJ was born.
Yeah.
You worked with the Legal Development Fund, Legal Development Facility, which started, and I think you were saying 2007.
7.
2007, okay. And Kate Sumner, who continues to work with ARPJ doing great work, was your initial contact and partner in research. And obviously Pat Wahyu, who was then Director General.
Yes, he was in and Pak Wahyu Diana, he was our champion. He is the head of the system.
So Nani founded an organization, PAKAR, which is the Association of Women-Headed Households in Indonesia. And Nani, can you talk a little bit about your background, why you founded PAKAR, and what you thought was really important in the way that PAKAR and ARPJ worked?
Yes, I have been consider myself as women's activist since I was graduate from IPB in 1987, long time ago. And it's very, very much personal journey, and it's bring back. It's not intentionally to work on women's rights issues at that time, but because I couldn't find a job discriminated against my veil at that time. In that journey, then I found it's bring back actually my memory to my childhood when I've experienced with us the violence against women for the first time when I was 7 years old. I witnessed my auntie beaten by her husband in front of the whole family, and no one really helped her because it's like at that time I was 7 years old girl, right? And I saw this and terrified and didn't really understand. And when I joined this women's rights organization in 1987 called the Center for Women Resource and Development, I realized that's what causes discrimination against women, violence against women. So that's really bad. And why I established PAKAR, Women-Headed Family, in end of 1998 during the transformation, so reformation of Indonesia, right? The violence happened everywhere. And I personally, I have also family turbulence. My marriage ended at that time. So I got divorced because of my husband has another woman. So I was very sad and very upset at the very low level at that time. And Kamala Chandra Kirana was the Secretary General of Stop Violence Against Women, approached me asking if I would like to help Komnas Perempuan to document the life of widows in conflict area. So I asked her, why you ask me? Because I'm divorced or what? And they said, no, because you have a long time grassroots organizing. And we want to see what happened when conflict happened in Indonesia. People only counting the body, how many people died. But do not really see the other survivors, the other victims, women and children, right? And mostly they are widows. So from that journey, I witnessed that women, when they become the head of the family, for whatever reasons, widows, divorce, or abandoned, or single women even, they face multiple problems, multiple burdens, multiple challenges. And personally, when I get divorced, I experience all of them. That's why, and then when Nana asking me to document the life of widows, because they asked me to coordinate this program, so I proposed, can I change the paradigm of this project, just to support the widows with giving the cash transfer into empowerment, which really highlight the widows as the head of the family. It's not only the poor women, miserable women, sad women, bad women, but really women who have strong dignity and have a lot of power, a lot of responsibility and roles, yet stigmatized.
And when you started, did you see the link to justice, or was it broader than that?
In case of PAKAR, from the beginning, when we start introduce women-headed family narrative, the first resistance coming from Islamic community, because it's the teaching that the head of the family is a man in Islam. That's what they said. So we see that in our advocacy work, we are facing 3 levels of power. First, what we call is visible power, which is coming from the structure, like government, with the law and those kind of things. And the second, very strong, coming from the hidden power, which is mostly religious leaders who actually they are authoritarian, and they actually control the narrative. Yeah. You can, for example, in Aceh at that time, we are not allowed to use women-headed family narrative. You can only use gender, the word gender for widows, divorce, let's say at the same time. And the third power, of course, the invisible one, the mindset of the people. I have experience when I get divorced. I lose everything. I lose, of course, my husband, and then with the 3 children, small children, and I have to face 2 courts, family courts in Indonesia. First, the court to divorce, which I filed the case without nothing understanding and knowledge about how to deal with the court, and I don't have money to have a lawyer, so I do it by myself. It's 6 months, very depressing process, And the judges, women judges, accused me, said, "Of course your husband married again because you are busy, because you don't do your job." I said, "While you judges, yes, in family court in Indonesia." And the second, I have to face the court when my husband filed the case for children custody. It's very painful process. So that I know, as a educated, I have a master's degree from the U.S., well-educated women, have a job, have friends, have everything better. I have studies and I face all that pain. And I can imagine whenever with all these women and the people in the rather my bias, Well, actually, the grassroots women are very strong survivor and shameful for me, all that. Yeah, so I know from the beginning that there is a legal issues, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to start. So just started with saving learning because that's my experience. Yeah, yes, my expertise.
And Liz, when we first met, I think within AAPJ, we were really struggling to relate our work to people's real issues.
Yeah.
Justice is often seen as institutions, and institutions are filled with, often elite people.
Yeah.
And one of our challenges, I think, in 2012, 2013, was to make a much clearer line between the work we do and benefits for people, particularly poor people. And you came along and offered us a way of looking at issues. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. It's, I think, connected with Nani experience because at the time, I met with Nani in Aceh. Of course, before that, we already met in 1995. Yeah. And in Beijing. But in Beijing, you are right, in the conference, international conference was meeting. But related to the issue of poverty and justice sector, I met in Nani after tsunami. At the time, I was the program officer for the Asia Foundation and started with the doing training for Islamic judges in Aceh under the supervisor of the Pak Wahwidiana from Badilak. And we realized that it's very important to document our experience. And I asked Nani, I have a lot of experience from the field because I was a researcher and now I am a researcher too. So how to, to publish our experience from the feminist perspective? Because Nadi said so many experiences that taken from women by the researcher, but they forget about women voices. So and Nani asked me, is it possible for you to do the publication based on the research?
You did that research with a buddy on who was taking the photographs as well.
And
the documentation through the photographs was a really important part of the book. Clearly, you had a lot of empathy in bringing the stories forward to women.
For example, it's about child marriage, but I remember about this.
I put the issue more in the forefront, particularly of our work at the time.
More vivid, And then the important thing I still remember at the time when we start with the writing of the book, I need someone as a benchmark to transport my knowledge about feminism and gender with it's readable for the lay people, let's say like that. So actually, because of you, at the time you said that not considered as a feminist, Pak Greg at the time mentioned like that. It is very important for us because you are, and also Armin Hari, our photographer, is the parameter whether our idea could be understood or not. That's the important thing in the process of writing the book. And then after that, after we publish the book, actually this is this a portrait of reality, women justice and poverty in Indonesia from Aceh to NTT. And some of them also are partners of PEKAR.
There were other programs looking at economic empowerment and I suppose more mainstreaming of gender into their programs. So we had to focus on those issues that we could pursue, through our counterparts, through our partners, and you were fantastic in helping us do them. Obviously, PEKAR was existing and provided a really suitable partner for us to pursue things like legal identity, access to justice through community paralegals. We always said the court can come more to the people, but the people still have to come to the court. And Nani and PEKAR have been really instrumental in that. And they've actually formed a relationship with the court now directly. So we've been really proud of the role that we could play, again, the space in between. We were able to support PEKAR to communicate with the court. The court can be a little bit inaccessible, both in terms of distance, but also in terms of access to the leadership.
And the gender matter.
But well, the court is very patriarchal, and they're changing. And the work in supporting women judges recently is really, really promising. But certainly back in 2007 when you started, and then in ARPJ 2012, 2013, that was a challenge, and Pat Wahyu was a really fantastic bridge, but also the way you were able to present research to the leadership, they appreciated, because they need evidence to act on. And so Manolak Tungmal is really, it was a fantastic platform for us to talk about the real issues of gender justice and how they affected women personally, as you've talked about, Nani. So can you talk a little bit about how you've seen people's, I suppose, justice problems and work through them through your research?
I was born in a rural area in West Java, but my parents originated from Central Java. So when I think since I was childhood, the feeling being minority in terms of the cultural background, because it's like my parents from Java, as orang Jawa, were living in Sundanese area. So you can feel being minority and excluded. Sometimes I was thinking, want to change my blood from Japanese orang Jawa to become Sundanese, because it's feeling unpleasant of being minority and also excluded. But I think that is very important for me as a foundation to become more sensitive into the minority groups. And also because I was born and grew up in a mixed culture, Sundanese and Javanese, I came from the family who introduced me about diversity. So it's very fundamental for me. And the third one is my mother. She was the breadwinner, the main breadwinner. But because she is the Javanese and at the same time very traditionalist, she will surrender to my fathers as if she has no power and no authority over her money, for example. But because of that, my mother pushed us, insisted that education for girls is very important. So that is why this experience to me is very important as a foundation how to become a feminist and at the same time also more sensitive about the minority.
And Nani, can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Yes. So my background is fishery science. Actually, I'm very much scientist. That I think keep deep inside of my memories and my feelings, things. But they are there, right? So when I first time become the field workers, then I realized that there are a lot of issues, problems women face, but it's become normalized. Then it's recall all my childhood experience, how I see my mother who has to give up of her education because her uncle want to rape her when she was living with them, with the family. And then one of my auntie, her husband practiced polygamy, is married. And that's my another auntie who's have beaten by the husband. But that's all become normalized because nobody sees it from the justice perspective. It's like your dignity, right? To experience all that poverty, difficulties, and you have to deal with it. So I slowly building my consciousness on actually this is not right. And as a field staff, new fresh graduate who has all this arrogance of intellectuality, right? Coming from FPB, then I know how little. Then I realized how little I understand about these social issues. More than 60% of women in rural area actually do not register their marriage, and when their husband run away, that's it, end of their life, right? And then why there is the case coming from the village very, very low. So that's the research question. And I really hesitated to meet Kate because I thought we research and they will ask me qualification, and then after that, what? Nothing happened, right? And then I challenged Kate. I only want to do this research if the result come back to the women that we are asking questions.
Yeah, as mentioned to me, that is why we did research, because Nani said, "Oh, you always do research, but you didn't give the result to the subject of the research." And I promised Nani, I will do this that research with the support from you.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about our experiences with research, but a lot of the success that we've seen in implementation has come from the way that the research has then influenced policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really interested to hear from you what your expectations were after the research, and then about your experience in the follow-up of the research so that it actually led to changes. And I think, Liz, you've talked about child marriage and the child marriage prevention. Nani, I think access to justice has been an absolute passion of yours. So maybe you can talk about how the research has then been put into practice.
Okay, back to the background of organization. Rumah Kitab is the research center for advocacy. We try to develop two kinds of research sociology, anthropology, and Islamic teaching. So when we start with the idea about advocacy for child marriage, actually both of the research, we do both of the research. For example, when we talk about the maturity, we start from the religious teaching, what the religious background information about maturity. And then it's very important we try to find out from the Islamic text, for example, when we discuss about child marriage. And at the same time also, we conduct the research social anthropology. And like Nani just mentioned, that we actually follow the statistic. But for us, a statistic is just indicated because the reality is more than that. One girl who had marriage, let's say in Lombok, its impact it's not only for her, but also for the for the children and also for the society. So that is why I think, to be honest, we give respect to EIPJ to allow us, to give a freedom for us to do research on child marriage at that time. And also after that, because EIPJ also not only work on the research, but also advocacy. For example, you work with Bappenas to propose TRANAS, the what we call the national strategy, and also the national strategy of Bappenas also developed the roadmap. It also gave us the direction how to deal with, how to solve the problem.
The research for PACA has been a really significant driver of your advocacy. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of access to justice and what results you've seen over time?
Yes. Yeah, so when we organize women-headed family widows divorce list, we found out that more than 60% of women actually do not have any legal marriage identity, whether they're divorced or marriage, and as the consequence is the children do not have birth certificate. Yeah, because that's the system. So our research with LDF at that time actually to find out why women does not have that all, and why when the women get violence from husband, the husband run away for 9 years, but they never take the legality of that. There are several things, right? First, of course, they don't know that they have this legal protection,
Yes.
actually.
Yeah.
And they don't know why we have to do it, why we have to have this legal protection until they face the problems when their children want to get higher education. They need birth certificate they don't have. And there are a lot of legal consequences for that, right? And the second, it's very expensive because the court are far away.
Very well.
Yeah. And the third is the language. They know the information.
Yeah.
And then they don't know about the information is on very legal term and very long, and of course the distance. So with all these informations, then we develop a policy paper to be discussed with the Supreme Court, particularly the Directorate General of
Religious court or family court, for Muslim citizens.
Yeah. And then, of course, Pak Wahyu at that time as the Director General, he's very progressive, he's very responsive, right? And then there are several policy developed to really exercise bringing the court to the community, which to the village. So we organize village court, and then the women who actually become the resource person for the research, then become the first client to that. That's how the research, can directly benefit the women who become the resource person for that research we experience. So because of that, then of course the policy is not only implemented to that place, right? To all over Indonesia.
Yes.
Yeah. So with this research, PACA then developed several initiatives which become institutionalized. First, we create what we call is a Klik PACA. This is a legal clinic for information and legal information for community. This is community-based, where all people can come to consult, and then to consult about the legal matters, and then organize maybe village court or organize multi-stakeholder forum to bring it to order. And the second is really to show to the government, to the system, that when you talk about poverty, it's not only about economic issues. Because in Indonesia, poverty, poor people, when we talk about poverty issues, poverty program, poverty alleviation program, the legal aspect of that are missing because there's always thinkings about economic. Or give legal cash transfer, or income generations, or microcredit, all these kind of things. But never thinks that actually, because the legal framework does not work at this ground, then women, the poverty become the cycles. Women cannot give better education to their children because there is no legal identity, and then
there are certain rights these women has been violated. For example, because they don't have their own family card, they don't have ID, they don't have they are considered someone wives, but actually the husband is already not there. Yeah, then they cannot get access to other public services. So that's the second thing that we uncover that, right? That actually poverty issues facing by women-headed family also relate with legal aspect. And the third is really to strengthen our movement with community-based paralegal. Because in order to access our legal framework in Indonesia, you need to have a lawyer on this kind, which is not available in the village, right? Yeah. So we rely on our leaders, our cadres, and we need to train them to very simple way of access to justice system. So they don't have any background, even only like elementary school. But when we use the methodology to draw out their own life experience and transform it into power to really exercise the justice system, how to talk to the legal court, how to tell your story, as Ibu is mentioned, right? The story is powerful framework change to open the eyes of the people in this system to see that numbers matter, but even matters you listen to the lived reality. And the women tell that their story, they are the survivor of injustice system, then this system listen to them. So these, I think, three things that we celebrate in our collaboration with the IPG, which now become also institutionalized in PACA as the system.
And the courts, to their credit, responded to the demand for legal services through legal aid posts and more services for people to access the court.
Yes, I think what is the strong of these collaborations, we as the grassroots organization, as partners of the IPJ, we are doing all these like quoting stories and then practicing the policy into implementations. And then the IPJ, I think, directly also, right, working with the Supreme Court and, strengthen their team, their system. So I think this kind of program framework is very powerful to make a systemic change. Rather than, for example, if only us doing this, I'm sure there will not, we manage to like influence around, I think, almost around 14 policy at the national level related to family court, right, with these collaborations. But that's because this different level of working, IPJ working with us directly and also with the Supreme Court, with the justice system in district and up to national level. So with that on, of course, there are some challenges, but at least data, because they manage very well.
Yeah, and I know we talked about when the book came out.
Yeah,
it really did elevate the issue of child marriage, and a whole lot of women's organisations would
pay attention on that.
Yeah, we're also lending their voices to it.
Yeah,
but you didn't expect the national strategy to happen.
Yeah,
for in the short term at all.
Yeah, no, because I quite understand that this issue is not easy. It's quite difficult. But I think in a metaphorical way, your role, EIPG role, is like the bridge who connects so many institutions in different levels. And suddenly we come up with the same direction how to solve the problem. This is a good example. I think it's also like the homework for the EIPG in the future, how to record that experiences, how to connect with different levels and become theory, something like that. Because it's not easy. If we look at the historical background, the issue of child marriage already existed since the colonial era, 100 years. And suddenly, just only in 10 years, we already, let's say, changed the policy. So this is a very important experience that we had from EIPG. And I think in the future, EIPG has to, to record again, to become a module, how to deal with, how to work together in the different levels and also different actors.
A lot of the work we're doing now is probably more through networks and coalitions and movements. There's a temptation to see movements, whether disability movement or the women's movement, as one size fits all or homogenous sort of entities, and yet there's amazing diversity in these movements and in these coalitions. And I think one of the lessons I've had to learn is to allow space for difference of opinion, to allow space for difference in strategy, and to allow people to work it out themselves, not necessarily come in as the provider of funding and be the referee, because both views, both strategies can be equally valid, and they need to be allowed to run rather than necessarily making a choice. And I think that's sort of how, I mean, do you feel the same way? I mean, you've been part of these movements.
Yeah.
I have a different role because I'm probably, one of my main roles is to try and access resources for your work.
Yeah.
And then I suppose decide on how those resources are deployed. But within the movement, you have these conflicts going on all the time.
Yeah. I think the good thing is we in the matter of communication and discussion among us, and we allow us to change in the middle, for example, in terms of approach. Let's say when we start with the issue of the child marriage, we didn't have an idea that when we talk with the youth, what should we do? We cannot only talking about the religious teaching or the Islamic jurisprudence, but also we have to understand about their situation and their feelings. That is why the good thing from the EIPG, for example, allow us to change the program when we work with youth in Jakarta Utara, in Northern Jakarta. And we, with them, based on their experiences, we talk about child marriage through the local drama. That's a good thing. The idea came from there, from the youth. The content was about child marriage. The story was about child marriage. But the way of, explanation the issue through the social media and also to media that is familiar with them. This is a good thing for us, You allow us, the EIPG allow us to be more creative in, deliver the idea about the child marriage.
And the other things, I think the diverse organization need to work together because everyone can contribute with their own methodology approach. And the intergeneration, I think, also very important. So working with even with children up to the elderly people is very important because there's always knowledge among these different generations, which important to be organized as a power to make change. Otherwise, if you only working for young people, for example, then you forgot some experience that has been passed through by the elderly generation, and the vice versa, right? Didn't listen to young generation with facing different contexts now. Only listen for adult thinking who has different context when they experience it. Then we will miss some of the approach and methodology as Ali says.
For example, when we start with the research, the fiqh, the Islamic jurisprudence of child marriage is quite serious. And to me, this is fit with our own background. But then the good thing is because my staff also, some of them are young, and that can we translate this into the social media way? I said that, then we'll lose so many things. But then if not, then you will lose everything.
Yeah. For us, social media is like a tools, right? It's unstoppable. We cannot resist that because it's there and will be developed. So, but our challenge is most of Peka community are the poorest of the poor who does not have access to that actually at the beginning. That's why what we do with AIPJs, first actually introduce about the powerful of storytelling. So that's why we have citizen journalism training for women to write their story in effective way, and then collect that story, then publish it into a bulletin, something like very traditional one, and then slowly introduce them to social media, which is Facebook, where they have all access to that, and put up that story into this social media, and then organize the community to come together to see that social media, because it's really have to walk through them how to engage with social media and how to use social media as a platform to spread the information, to share the stories, and then use that to organize and use that as a powerful organizing approach.
Now, AIPJ has been a partnership and it's been going now since 2011 in 2 phases. And as a partnership, I think one of the things we've valued is our partners and the way you've really shaped the partnership. So I thank you both for your contribution to that. When I started in my role, I hadn't worked in Indonesia before. I was a little bit different perhaps from other team leaders that were seen as Indonesianists. So I've definitely learned a lot from you. As we move forward, what lessons or observations do you have that we should be thinking about in terms of a partnership and AIPJ's role moving forward?
To me, is the principle of K2P. From knowledge to policy.
Knowledge.
I think it's always process from knowledge to policy. We got the opportunity from AIPJ, because sometimes as a research center, it's very difficult to find, for example, support to do research. But you give us the opportunity. What kind of research? You always start with the research, and then from research we go on to the policy. So this is a good thing, and thanks on behalf of the Rumah Kitab and myself. So really happy to work with AIPJ. The second thing is the network. You give us opportunity to develop the network. You already mentioned, for example, with the Nur Huda Ismail, I always criticizing him. Where did you put the gender element? And after that, we work together. Without you, without AIPJ, we can continue to work on the de-radicalization with the gender perspective. So that's from me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the lessons from working with AIPJ is that AIPJ's framework is very much system change. Try to change the system, but do not really forget that when you're talking about the system, you have to also look at the grassroots, the lived reality. So because we are grassroots organizing and AIPJ work with us, so we thought your framework very much appreciate what happened at the ground and use that as listed, from knowledge to policy. So it's not just changing the policy, try to change this. That's one thing. And the second, I think the role, what AIPJ play roles, at least what we experience, is really the bridging. The bridging from this level, which, we are dealing with Supreme Court. Right? Supreme Court is very far away from my thinking when I started with PEKA. And then we have we have open access to Supreme Court and, influence, have directly engage with them, because AIPJ create the space for that and navigate the space and connect us with different key players or champions in that system. So I think that the program, which focusing very much on system change, connecting grassroots with that system and bring the grassroots as part of the key element in the system change, is very rare for AIPJ. So thank you so much for it.
So Mani and Liz, thank you for participating in our first episode, for being our our first guests. I had every confidence in that you'd carry this episode, and you've done it amazingly. So thanks, and I look forward to many conversations with you both in future.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching. I hope this episode inspires you to join the journey of Justice and Us, bridging the space in between. See you in the next episode.